Dr. Emmons, I am very grateful to be talking to you right now.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. It's great to be with you.
You've done a lot of work on the topic of gratitude. And I wanted to ask you about gratitude because gratitude is something, as a rabbi, it's a topic that we talk about all the time. And I want to tell you a problem that I have, maybe you can help me with.
Okay. Look forward to it.
Sometimes we find that there are people who come from our tradition, specifically who were raised in our faith community, and because of experiences they had, they're turned off. Like they have a visceral reaction to anything that has any type of theological, anything that smells of any type of theology. And yet I know that gratitude is so healing for them and so important for them. I'm wondering if you can help me sort of find a secular backdoor from the world of psychology to talk to someone who needs that gratitude so desperately, but they're sort of temporarily locked off from getting to it from an overtly spiritual path.
Yes, that is a great question. And I think that happens all of the time. I think that happens in many traditions. I think there is one of the reasons why gratitude has had such an appeal to people, not only because it's something which, I think is very effective and very valuable for living, a good life, a full life, a life of flourishing, well-being, thriving, whatever you want to call it, all of those things. It's certainly a key to health and to wholeness and to wellness and to fullness, but also I think it serves a very deep spiritual need for people, whether they think of themselves as spiritual or not, whether they think of themselves as conventionally religious or not. I think gratitude says something very deep about who we are as human beings and what we need. Just the need to understand the origins of kindness, of goodness, of benevolence. Where does it all come from? And one can look at that either through the lens of theology and world religions, and they've said some amazing things over the centuries, of course, about the power of gratefulness and thankfulness. But one can also approach that surely from the perspective of other fields, humanities, the sciences, my own field, psychology, sociology. So it's got a cross-discipline appeal to it. And there's insights to be gained from all these different perspectives.
So, Doctor, tell me a little bit, because sometimes, a mentor of mine once told me that sometimes people are more comfortable listening to the person in the white coat than the person in the black coat. So I wear the black coat, the long black coat. Tell me, give me numbers, give me studies, convince me that gratitude isn't just something that religious people made up. Convince me that this has grounding in today's science.
Yeah, I mean, the science is really amazing. Since really 10 years ago, there's been more research, more studies on the science of gratitude in the previous 50 years. Now, of course, science and psychology, especially as a social science, has a very short history, compared to theological understandings of gratitude. So what we've learned in the really recent past, and we know so much now about gratitude. There's really a mountain of research showing that gratitude matters, that it works. And so no studies have found that gratitude is harmful, which is also, I think important to show there's no bad side effects. So gratitude works on many different levels. You really cannot overplay the hand of gratitude. And we can quantify all of these things. These are quantifiable, measurable. These are sustainable effects. And we're learning more every day in every way that gratitude matters.
You mentioned that you can never go wrong. There's a Jewish expression. It's like chicken soup. It can't hurt. Right? They give them some chicken soup. It can't hurt, right? But there are people who will push back and say that it can hurt. What they say is, well, really what you're asking me to do is to have a candy-coated version of reality and to fool myself, really to be deluded and to be out of touch from reality, which is useless or maybe even harmful or dangerous. And there's definitely an impression, especially for people who've gone through a lot of pain in life, that gratitude is foolish or ignorant or even dangerous. So how do you allay those fears?
I mean, there are a lot of beliefs and preconceptions that people have about gratitude. Sometimes, there's some validity to it. But a lot of times, though, we can point to ways in which we can, challenge some of those assumptions. So, and I know I've been doing this for a while. I've been swimming in the waters of gratitude for quite some time now. And I get testimonies from people. People call me, they write to me, they email me, they send me letters from prison, from hospitals. They've been through all kinds of trauma in their lives, suffering, adversity, afflictions, addictions. I mean, you name it. And they, what they say is that they were at the end of their rope, right? They were in a hole that was so deep, they had to reach up just to touch the bottom. And they found healing in gratitude. Somehow, someone, shines some light on their situation. There was a glimpse of goodness, of kindness, of benevolence. Someone believed in them. And that started them on the road to healing. That gave them a reason to go on. That made gratitude very real and very concrete. Gratitude on the ground. It's quite different from just a theoretical, very, abstract, ethereal concept of gratitude. That isn't it great to be grateful and to, look on the bright side and have gratitude as an orientation. Sometimes, though, we have to experience it very concretely on the ground in the face of goodness, overcoming the darkness, right? And so gratitude is not just something that shines a light on the goodness, but sometimes we see it in the depths and in the darkness and in the suffering of life as well. And I got lots of testimony from people who say that sort of thing. So I know that's a real phenomenon.
It's interesting you're saying that because people tend to think about you're grateful for something good, overtly good. And what it sounds like you're saying is, well, gratitude doesn't mean you have to wait for something that's overtly good. From our tradition, we know this. We have a tradition that just as one is obligated to bless God for that which is overtly good, one has to bless God and express thanks even when something happens that overtly, on the face of it, appears to be very painful because it's all from God. It sounds like you're saying something similar.
Well, and that's the big question, right? I mean, given the inevitability and unavoidability of stress and suffering and trials and tribulations, the question becomes, what do we make of those, right? And you deal with this on a daily basis, right? On, real life on the ground and the question that I ask as a researcher is, can anything good come out of something bad? What good thing can come out of, divorce or separation or death or sickness or unemployment or the pandemic or, the list is endless. Can we extract some possibility, some opportunities out of this terrible situation? And we know that people do that all the time. I mean, there's a huge body of research literature looking at how people grow as a consequence of stress and trauma. Obviously, they didn't want the stress. They didn't want the trauma. They hate it, right? They're not necessarily grateful for it. But can they find some possibilities or find some opportunities through it? And I think a critical distinction, Rabbi, is to be made between feeling grateful in response to something happening to you right now, which I would call that conditional gratitude, right? It's circumstantial. It's reactive to situations. So obviously, it's much easier. We all feel more grateful when good things are happening, right? The question becomes, can our gratitude become unconditional? Can it become more proactive as an attitude which persists quite apart from circumstances, right? So can I say to myself, I'm going to be grateful no matter what happens? Can I find the good in the bad? Or even think about, long term, maybe this is a terrible situation now, but ultimately something good can be redeemed out of something bad. We know that people do that because people are very resilient mentally and emotionally. And for many people, that is based upon their spirituality and their worldview, as you were saying. But it's also a skill. It's also a practice that people can engage in. And when people do that, they can convert that adversity into potential prosperity, and the problems become opportunities, at least the potential for opportunities. Of course, much easier said than done. I think just creating the possibility of looking at an event from different perspectives, right? I mean, I think gratitude is a way of seeing that changes our gaze, okay? That we start to see where we just saw, complaints or burdens before we get a glimpse of what might be possible. Okay, with gratitude, it's a way of seeing that gives us more flexibility and creativity in how we approach a situation. It's really a form of problem solving when you think about it. During the last year, the pandemic, people kept talking to me and asking me, and I was getting all these requests for interviews. It's like, Professor Emmons, how can we, cultivate gratitude in the midst of this? And I have to be honest with you, I didn't really feel like participating in those interviews because they were looking for like more advice about what to do, right? Here's 5 things we need to do to cope better, to have less stress, to become, more resilient or whatever. And I was thinking, most of the time, not always out loud, not always explicitly, but one of my reactions was, look, people are being told enough stuff already. They're already hearing all these things about what to do, what not to do, where to go, where not to go. And the list went on, right? It's like the last thing people needed was one more so-called expert out there giving them advice about how to be grateful in the midst of a pandemic. So, I think there's a time and a place for everything. But one of the things I stressed is that, if we can't be grateful right now, can we project ourselves into the future? Can we have what I call prospective gratitude? That says, even though my life is, not the way I want it right now, even though, the challenges and trials are much greater than I would ever, want for myself or my family. Can I think about, 6 months, a year, 2 years from now? Can I imagine myself and can I visualize, maybe simulate positive outcomes of health and healing and, recovery and all those different dimensions, right? And can I feel grateful for what not is right now, but what might be in the future? And I call that the kind of prospective or forecasted gratitude. And that seemed to me kind of a nice way of thinking about gratitude, which doesn't, ignore or deny the realities of the immediate situation, but puts it in a broader perspective, down the road. So I think gratitude has this elasticity to it, this flexibility. It's not just about the present situation or even the past, but it also has bearing on the future and how we think about, potential future scenarios. So I think it has the stretching of time. It has an elasticity that a lot of approaches to life don't necessarily have that flexibility.
I what you're saying really resonates with me. I think part of the problem when people are cut off from gratitude is that they're very stuck right now, here in the moment. They can't see past what's happening right now. One of the things we try to do from a faith perspective is just to expand people's thoughts about their situation. So, when you believe in something greater than yourself, it sort of expands the context of life. It's not just what's happening right here, right now. There's a bigger picture. We try to give people a bigger picture. It's how this moment leads to future moments and how your decisions will affect others, and the ripple effect, and the way we speak about it from a faith perspective is God has a much bigger plan, and maybe this part of the plan is a painful part of it, but it all sort of it fits into a bigger picture.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm wondering what you can tell me from a psychological perspective, how to get people to expand, to see past the immediate present.
Right. I mean, one of the reasons I think why gratitude is so powerful is that it, by its very nature, it's transcendent, it's other directed, right? Because we're not grateful to ourselves, right? I mean, it's always directed outward. It's a self-transcendent attitude that sees ourselves as really dependent upon, the kindness of other people, the sustenance of God, of other people doing things and securing things, forces out there that are sustaining us. We didn't create ourselves, right? I mean, the belief that we are self-reliant, is an illusion that most people at some point realize. For some people, it takes suffering, it takes trauma, it takes loss for them to realize how dependent they are upon circumstances which are much more, powerful than they are. So these sometimes create the potential or possibility for gratitude. And so, the long perspective, just seeing oneself and drawing upon memories of when you've had these experiences in the past, right? I mean, one of the things we ask people to do in some of the research studies on gratitude is think about something that happened to you that really was maybe one of the worst things. So we put people in a good mood by asking them to think about something terrible, right? It's kind of like what psychologists like to do in the laboratory under safe conditions, of course. But then remember that, you made it through that, that dark night. You've survived, you recovered, and look at your life now. So ask them to engage in this mental comparison. And we know that our minds do that all the time, right? We're always comparing ourselves and our situation to what it used to be, to what it could be, to what we want, to what it's not, and all of those things. So why not use that comparison in a way that, fosters and advances our well-being as opposed to diminishing it? And so one good way is just remembering the bad. See where you are now, though, because you recovered. You made it through that dark time. And maybe now you have some, previously unknown strength or quality in yourself that you can recognize. Maybe now you realize you can count on other people in a way you couldn't before. You realize that there's kindness and there's benevolence out there, whereas before there was just, randomness and fate and all kinds of negative, attributions about the world. So think about it, again, going back to the notion of getting very specific, very concrete. The truth is in the details, right? It's like listing 100 blessings a day in your tradition, or is it more than that? It's a lot, right? Right, but very specific, right? And the more specific you are, the more you're going to benefit from that practice. And we do that with our gratitude journaling. We ask people to write down what they're grateful for. And the people who get very concrete, very specific, they show the most benefit.
Well, can you speak a little bit more about what we know today about people's capacity to project, to, I think you called it elasticity.
Yes.
What do we know today about the way the human mind works that allows us to, to use your word, to be transcendent?
Yes. Well, there are people, and I'm not that familiar with, I haven't kept up on the psychology of happiness research, which is actually where I began all my work on gratitude back in the mid 80s by studying happiness. I was in graduate school, and that's what my professor was studying. And actually, happiness was thought to be too of a subjective concept, too loose, too soft, not very rigorous or empirical. So we decided we wouldn't use the H word at all. You thought it was bad to study religion in the academy or spirituality. Well, happiness was even worse. Okay, so we called it subjective well-being. Huh? Much more impressive, right? Rigorous sounding, you get grant money to do that sort of thing, and so on. But anyway, so some of the happiness researchers, of which there are a lot now, there's a whole industry out there that tells you how to be happy in 10 steps and 7 secrets, 30 days, 3 hours if you're in a hurry, focuses on what they call forecasting or predicting your happiness. And it turns out people are not very accurate at it. So you can ask them to focus on something good in their lives and how long that will last. And people will tend to think it's going to last a long time. So we kind of overestimate the goodness. And we also overestimate the badness. Something bad happens to us, like a loss, like a relationship ends or a job loss, unemployment. People think it's going to affect them for like years down the road. But it's amazing. People recover very quickly. I mean, not overnight, of course, but even within 6 months to a year, most people have recovered from major negative events, even like an illness, even an injury. Famous studies done on people who had spinal cord injuries, found that within 2 years, their levels of happiness were very similar to what they were 2 years before, and really not much different from a control group. And then, good things were good things. Yeah, go ahead.
That's very surprising to hear that. So basically, you're not saying they were necessarily all happy, but however happy they were before, that's basically what they went back to. They went back to their baseline.
And they're happier than most people thought they would be when they were both those people themselves predicting how happy they would be. But then the person who doesn't really know them or know about their condition, just making predictions about, given this set of circumstances, how happy would this person be? We tend to underestimate their happiness, and their happiness is actually higher than that. So we're actually not very good at making these predictions.
What emerges from this for me is that it sounds like you're saying the science shows that we, human beings, are a lot more resilient than we tend to believe we are. I'm sincerely curious from a social sciences perspective, how do you even devise an experiment to test gratitude? Like, how would you even? Okay, I want to study gratitude. How do you study it? What do you do? What do you look for? I mean, describe for me a study or one that you've been involved in, or that you've studied, or that, or we could maybe we'll come up with a new study, an idea for a new study right here. But what does it even look like? How do you test something like that?
Sure, of course. Well, so a scientific view would, of course, rest upon empirical observations and testing, and ideally experimentation. Now, as a psychologist, there's lots of ways that we collect data, right? We can interview people, we can develop questionnaires and surveys, which we do all the time. It's what we do. We do that while we're asleep, right? And I've done that for a long, long time. But when I first started to do this research, I wanted to do something that would have an immediate impact. I wanted to use a sports analogy, put some points on the board early, So I conducted what was a randomized controlled trial, which is the gold standard for scientific research or medical research, right? If you want to prove the validity, efficacy of a new treatment or drug, you need to, have people assigned to different conditions, have a control condition, make comparisons, and all those sorts of things, right? The gold standard randomized controlled trials. So did the same thing with gratitude. Now, gratitude is not a treatment, it's not a pill, it's not a shot, it's not a vaccine, and so on. But was there a way which we could have people maybe think more gratefully, or cultivate an awareness of gratitude in their lives? And if so, what impact would that have? So what would you measure as a dependent outcome, right? A dependent variable? Well, you could look at their mood, their happiness. You could look at how they cope with stress. You could look at their relationships, if they felt, more close or connected to others versus lonely, getting along, arguing with people. So kind of there's a usual set of suspects when it comes to outcome, right? We call criterion variables in the domain of happiness and well-being, and which I traffic in anyway. But we need a comparison group, right? So we assigned half the people to write about what they were grateful for, and do this every day for roughly 3 weeks. And you could do it for
journaling, basically.
Yeah, journaling, gratitude journaling, right? So the next group has to be a comparison.
No, and then the other group had to do a
hassles
gratitude journal?
Well, complaints. So they were complaining. So we call these the whiners and the complainers, right?
And they had to write about all their complaints every day.
So it was business as usual for most people. Right, things going wrong, and then they do this every day, and so we're directing their minds to either blessings or gratitudes or burdens or hassles or complaints, and the question becomes, how do they experience life differently as a function of doing this on a regular, systematic basis?
And what'd you find?
So we did find lots and lots of benefits for the people who were in the gratitude condition. I mean, they felt better in terms of positive emotions. They felt more engaged, more alive, more vital. They actually slept better. We found lots of physical health benefits. They reported bothered less by everyday aches and pains. So sleep was the most important, I think, most surprising finding to me was that they were sleeping more each night. They were waking up the next day and feeling more refreshed. They fell asleep more quickly. I mean, we all know that people are sleep deprived, right? I mean, it's like one of the big public health concerns. We don't get enough sleep and all that sort of thing. And so here's something that was benefiting people in terms of this ultimate, bodily restorative activity. I mean, the list goes on and on. We found benefits in the domains of relationships. People felt closer, more connected, and they're actually becoming more giving. They were becoming more generous, more compassionate. People who knew them were saying, we're noticing all these changes, okay? And it wasn't just people writing down what they were grateful for and saying, oh yeah, I'm happy now, I'm healthy, I'm helpful, and so on. But like spouses, roommates, right? Sons, daughters, parents were saying, I don't know what you did to, so-and-so here, but I'm sure glad he was in your study because he's much nicer to be around. So the differences were observable to people outside the experiment. And now thousands of people, I think somewhere around 10,000 people have been in these studies in laboratories all around the world. And so they're all kind of extending our initial findings and looking at, positive changes across different realms of living. So gratitude is really this ultimate performance enhancing substance.
Wow. Ultimate performance enhancing substance, but it's legal.
It's legal, right? You don't get thrown out of the Olympics for it.
Wow, that's great. By the way, I just want to tell you, that is gold for me. Because that's what I need. Like, that's what when people are skeptical of me,
yes,
I need to be able to play that, and say, listen to Dr. Emmons, anyways.
I know, and I appreciate that. I've gotten so much support from the faith community for the science of gratitude, even though, people in your profession and in other religious traditions, you guys know all this stuff and you've been studying, you've been immersed in that. These traditions have, been immersed in this. As I mentioned, the texts and teachings and traditions are all about thankfulness and thanksgiving and gratitude. But people are strange, they don't believe it until they see the data, right? They want to see the numbers. And so I get, starting in September, I start to get requests from journalists and interviews. They want to do their annual Thanksgiving Day story about the science of gratitude. And it's like, you don't need me, right? Because you got thousands of years of tradition, which tell you all about thankfulness. But no, they want to know, what does it do to the brain, right? I mean, how does gratitude get under the skin, right? Does it affect our blood pressure? It reduces blood pressure by 10%. Maybe I'll practice gratitude. Not because God says I should, or because, it's beneficial from an ethical point of view to be grateful to our parents or our teachers, or whoever. But now I'm going to experience some physical health benefits. Now I've got the motivation to do it. That seems to be a strong motivator for people.
Doctor, it is a strong motivator. And that's why I'm so grateful that you're in this line of work, because I can beg and plead with people till I'm blue in the face. Please, for your own good, find what to be grateful for. Find the blessings. And sometimes I need the numbers. I need to be able to say, it's been studied, it's been researched. And as I mentioned earlier, sometimes because the people have trauma relating to religious experiences, they need a side door. They need another way to get to the gratitude. And then they're able to come back to all the richness that our faith has to offer. So
I think
you're making my job so much easier.
And I don't know about in your tradition, whether this comes up or not, but I think it may, that, for many people, the practice of gratitude is really fear-based. It's like, I need to be grateful because I don't want to be ungrateful, because I fear the consequences, either, spiritual or relational or whatever. And I mean, that's certainly a valid point, right? Because there's no tradition, as far as I know, that says it's good to be ungrateful. Every religious tradition, it prescribes gratefulness and it proscribes ingratitude. Okay. But is your, the question I think is, which is an interesting one, is your gratitude faith-based or is it fear-based, right? Are you being grateful to stay out of trouble or to stay in God's favor, right? Or to avoid punishment, spiritual punishment, or are you grateful as a response to God's benevolence and goodness and love and all of those things? I think those are very different motivations for gratitude, because, what's going to sustain you over the long haul, right? And this goes back to our earlier conversation about gratitude in good times versus bad times. So if I have a theory, if I have a spiritual worldview, which says that, God provides good things for my benefit, it's easy to be grateful when life is going well, but what happens during those difficult times or those periods where I sense God is not there, God's absence? Can I sustain that gratitude even in the absence of goodness? And I need a worldview that is deep enough and strong enough, that has roots that go down far enough that I can still be grateful, even though life is not giving me what I want it to be giving me at that time. And I think that's the power of faith when it comes to gratitude. Otherwise, gratitude is just this tactic or strategy for becoming happier. And there's lots of those, right? There are a dime a dozen. What makes gratitude distinctive is that it really is rooted in these, faith traditions. That gives it a depth, gives it a texture, gives it a dimensionality that, purely secular approaches don't have.
That's very interesting what you're saying, that, because seemingly what difference would it make if your gratitude is fear-based or faith-based? Either way, you have gratitude, But what you're saying is, no, if it's fear-based, then when the things happen that you fear, you're going to lose your gratitude when you need it most.
Yes.
But if it's faith-based, then even when you have times of trial and tribulation, you can project forward, you can expand your perspective, you get through it, and then you have the gratitude when you need it most. That's very...
And it can even you can even amplify your gratitude, right? Because it strips away everything else. It forces you to recognize your dependence, your humility, which is really, I think, the ground of gratitude. And I think, collectively, one of the reasons why the pandemic seems to have increased people's levels of gratitude, although I don't have data on it per se, but anecdotally, I think it's happening. We may have some data on it in the future as the studies get published. Is that people start to rely on, other people more. They had a greater sense of awareness of where things came from, whether it was, supply chain things or whether it was healthcare providers, governments, pharmaceutical companies. They became much more aware of what they needed in life and what was being provided for them. They couldn't do these things for themselves. And I think in some respects, they actually set the foundation for the experience of gratitude.
Dr. Emmons, this has been absolutely fascinating. I really appreciate you joining me today for this discussion.
Thank you, Rabbi. It's been my pleasure. I really enjoyed our conversation as well. Thank you so much for having me today.
Okay, my pleasure. We'll have to do it again sometime.
Looking forward to that.